In 1917, during World War I, Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks took power in the October Revolution in Russia. This threw the country into a period of chaos, and nations across the old empire began separating and fighting the Bolsheviks, notably Finland, Ukraine, Poland, the Cossacks, the Caucasian states, and the Baltic states. However, when the Bolsheviks made peace with Germany in March 1918, many of these nations were left under German influence. Plus, many would go on to fight civil wars and wars against other new states. Meanwhile, in Russia, people rose up against the Bolsheviks, opposing left-wing groups are some of the first to fight, while monarchists, republicans, foreign volunteers, and various other anti-Bolsheviks made alliances with the regionalists and formed the White Movement. In early 1918, the Whites under Alexander Kolchak established their government in the east, but the first major battles took place in the northern Caucasus, where the Whites had a great deal of support from the Cossacks. Otherwise, peasants defending their villages formed green armies, and anarchists formed black armies. But in May 1918, the Bolsheviks prevented the Czechoslovak Legion from travelling to fight their Austrian enemies on the front again. So they revolted and took key cities along the Trans-Siberian Railway. So, fearing that the Tsar could be rescued, the Bolsheviks had him executed in July. To make matters worse for the Bolsheviks, the Allied powers who hoped to overthrow them and reopen the Eastern Front began sending troops to Russia. They moved into Arkhangelsk, Central Asia, the Caucasus, and large parts of the Far East. So, after peace with Germany, Allied invasions, and the White Army's advances, by late 1918 the Bolsheviks only really held power in the western industrial cities, although they did have supporters all over. But then in November 1918, World War I came to an end. Eastern Europe was redrawn and thrown into chaos once again, and the Allied powers, except Japan, slowly began to withdraw their troops. So, seeing that opportunity, the Bolsheviks launched an offensive as far west as Poland, hoping to export their revolution to Europe. This was possible because Leon Trotsky had just implemented forced conscription, increasing the size of the Red Army to around 1 million men, and unlike the Whites, they had a united command. Nevertheless, by March 1919, this offensive ended in failure, and they only really took control of Belarus. In the east, the Red Army had more success. In April, they successfully counterattacked Kolchak's advance and, for the remainder of the year, pushed his armies further and further east. But in the south, White Army General Denikin launched a major offensive hoping to take Moscow, while General Yudenich, working with the Estonians, began to push on Petrograd from the north. Denikin advanced quickly and threatened Moscow, so the Bolsheviks formed an alliance with the Black Army in Ukraine in October 1919. The Black Army were able to cut off Denikin's overstretched supply lines, forcing him to retreat. This allowed the Soviets to repel the assault on Petrograd and reoccupy lost land in the south. At the beginning of 1920, the Bolsheviks finally had to admit they could not break the Baltic states, so began to withdraw and would later recognize their independence. Meanwhile, in the east, the White Army was all but destroyed. The Whites handed Kolchak over to the Bolsheviks to be executed. However, to appease Japan, Lenin created the Far Eastern Republic to act as a buffer state. In the south, Peter Wrangel replaced Denikin as head of the White Armies. However, by now the Whites could no longer effectively fight both the Black and Red Army. In April 1920, with the Whites on the retreat and an army a couple million strong, the Bolsheviks were able to invade Azerbaijan and secure its oil reserves. However, the Polish and the Ukrainians made an alliance and launched an offensive against the Bolsheviks, hoping to reunite the Ukrainian state. They captured Kiev in early May, but they were soon met by a numerically superior Red Army. The Red Army's counterattack drove deep into Poland, but it was eventually halted at the Battle of Warsaw in August 1920. The Polish made a separate peace with the Bolsheviks. This guaranteed Polish independence, but placed Ukraine and Belarus firmly under Bolshevik control. Then, in late 1920, the remnants of the White Army began to flee en masse. This allowed Lenin to break his treaty with the Black Army and turn on them. The Black Army would only finally surrender in August 1921 when their leader, Nestor Makhno, fled to Romania. In the meantime, in the winter of 1920 and 21, the Bolsheviks invaded Georgia and Armenia and crushed the White Army supporters who had taken Mongolia. Although pockets of resistance remained, notably in Central Asia until the 30s, the Japanese withdrawal from Siberia and the Bolsheviks' annexation of the Far Eastern Republic in 1922 effectively ended the Civil War and the Soviet Union was created. Millions died during the war and both sides carried out a staggering number of massacres and executions. To give just a small example, the White Army carried out pogroms in Ukraine while the Red Army killed and deported hundreds of thousands of Cossacks.